Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Scary true stories. Damn it, it's been too long since I had some bricks in my pants. Scare me. In this thread, we post the scariest shit we've ever seen. Doesn't need to be ghosts, doesn't even need to be paranormal, just scare me shitless. My scariest moment was when I was helping solve a spirit problem in a friend's house, and their living room turned into a charred wasteland. Turned out that a person died there when the previous house on that location burned to the ground. Then, I woke up. I'd still swear it wasn't a dream.
When I was 15, I spent the summer at my aunt and uncle's house on the coast of Lake Michigan. They have one kid, my cousin Tyler, who at the time was 6. I was sharing a room with my cousin. It was his room and I was sleeping on an air mattress. My cousin has always been known in our family for how much he sleepwalks. Sometimes my aunt and uncle would catch him walking around the house in the middle of the night, and sometimes he would even manage to get outside and pass out in the front lawn. He would never remember doing it though, so my family would always tease him for it. Anyway, one night, probably around 4 in the morning, I woke up because I heard a noise in our room. I looked over at my cousin's bed and saw him standing over his desk, hands clumsily bumping into his stuff and rustling about. I said out loud, "Tyler, what are you doing?" But he didn't respond. I realized he must have been sleepwalking, so I got out of bed. I walked up to him saying, "Tyler, wake up buddy, you're sleepwalking," and put my hand gently on his shoulder. As soon as my hand him, he dropped to the floor, as if he had been knocked out cold. I freaked out because I thought something had happened, but he was responsive again and he appeared to be okay. I told him he had been sleepwalking and about how he fell to the ground. He mumbled something about being sorry and crawled back into bed, so I said screw it and went back to bed as well. The next morning I told my aunt about what had happened. When I told her about how he dropped to the floor, she smiled and said that happened a lot. Whenever she or my uncle found him sleepwalking, he always did the same thing. This made me feel a little better, as the night before had pretty much freaked me out. I never brought it up with Tyler, and things seemed to be back to normal. I did, however, check out his desk a few days later to see what he had been messing with in his sleep. There were a couple old magazines, some various school supplies, and a pair of scissors. The scissors really stuck out to me, because this kid was really young, and I really couldn't think of a reason why his parents would allow him to have them in his room. It was my last few days at my aunt and uncle's house. My parents bought me a plane ticket home for Sunday morning, so come set I had all my things packed in the car and ready to go. Tyler was especially sad to see me go, as we had become really close friends over the summer. Saturday night, I told Tyler goodnight and crawled under the covers of the air mattress. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. I had been having a bad dream, but I couldn't remember what had happened. As I lay there in a cold sweat, trying to go back to sleep, I felt uneasy. I noticed that my cousin was breathing really heavily behind me, much heavier than someone who was sleeping. I rolled over to my left, and I saw my cousin sitting upright on the edge of his bed, apparently staring at me. "What the hell, Tyler? Why are you awake?" I mumbled while rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. He didn't answer. I sat up and repeated, "Tyler, why are you?" I stopped dead in the middle of my sentence. Tyler's eyelids were only half open, and his eyes were rolled up into the back of his head. His mouth was twisted into an unnatural smile, as if he was smiling as hard as he possibly could. I looked at his lap, and he was clutching the scissors from his desk so tightly his knuckles were turning white. He wouldn't respond to anything I said. He just kept breathing loudly, slightly swaying back and forth. I ran up to him and grabbed his arm, desperately trying to get him to snap out of it. The second I touched him, his eyes shot open and he took a huge gasping breath, like someone who had just been scared shitless. For at least 10 seconds we just stood there, frozen in fear, staring at one another and shaking. He told me he had been having a bad dream, but he couldn't remember what had happened. I took the scissors from him and told him to go back to bed. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at this kid. I didn't dare turn my back on him. Morning finally came, and it was my time to leave. Tyler and I never told anybody about what happened that night, and have not spoken with him about it since.
When I was in middle school, me and my older brother shared a room and a bunk bed. I slept on the top bunk and he slept on the bottom bunk, which protruded out toward the door. Sometimes I have trouble sleeping. I just lay in bed for a couple hours and stare at the ceiling until I finally fall asleep. On one of these nights around 1 in the morning or so, everybody else was asleep, including my brother. I decided that staring at the ceiling was boring. I got out of bed and quietly found a book to read and a little flashlight, so as to not wake up my brother. I sat facing him at the foot of his bed with my back against the door, because I always feel comfortable around him. I sat there reading my book and looking up at my brother sleeping every few minutes to make sure my light wasn't waking him up or anything, and because seeing him there made me feel safe. Being alone in the dark has always scared me. After about 30 minutes, I looked up and was surprised to see my brother sitting up in bed, looking directly in front of him, and in turn I shined my flashlight at him since I figured he was already awake, to ask if I had awakened him. When the flashlight lit up his face, I saw that his eyes were only partially open. He started saying something I didn't understand, like garbled bits of English mixed with some language I have never heard before, in a deep voice. It wasn't in a tired/half-asleep voice either, it was like he was wide awake. He continued for about 15 seconds and then immediately stopped and dropped back down on his bed, fast asleep. I called my brother's name several times, but he was asleep and I was too afraid to wake him up. Needless to say, I was scared shitless. I went downstairs and slept on a couch without a blanket because I was too afraid to go back into the room. In the morning, I told my brother what had happened and he didn't remember any of it. He thought it was hilarious, and after that I always made sure I fell asleep before he did. I always wonder if that was something that only happened once, or if he does that regularly in his sleep.
I was about 9 or 10. It was late fall, early winter, as I recall, and laying in bed, trying to get to sleep. There was nobody else in the room, and the radio was off, but suddenly I started to hear something, very faintly. At first I thought it was just some machinery from the industrial part of town. We lived less than half a mile away from it, so that wasn't unusual, but it wasn't like anything else I had heard before. It started off very faint, sounding kind of like corduroy pants zipping past each other as you walk, but not really. It very slowly grew louder. At first I was just curious, but I quickly started to get nervous as it seemed to grow closer. My room wasn't pitch black, as the sky was clear and the moon was fullish, and there was a faint light coming from under the door, which was right across the hall from the bathroom, which had a night light in it, so I could sort of see, but just barely. The sound continued to grow, and I didn't even think to hide anywhere. I can't say I remember why that didn't occur to me, though. As I tentatively listened to the sound draw ever closer, the inky black shadows in my room seemed to draw together, forming a swirling vortex which shaped itself into a sort of face, but horribly distorted and extremely disturbing. The sound, by this time, was much louder and seemed to originate from directly outside my window. From what I can remember of it, it sounded something like a combination of a person sawing through tough wood and someone panting heavily. I was amazed that neither my parents or my sister had come in to see just what the hell was making that noise. It seemed that loud, almost deafening. Scared beyond any rational thought, to the point that I don't think I could possibly have moved if I'd wanted to, all I could do was watch, wide-eyed, as the shadow face opened its mouth wide, wider, impossibly wide, even for something that was only made out of shadow. The sound suddenly stopped, and I thought it was over, but after a second, the face emitted the loudest, most horrifyingly inhuman, tortured scream that I have ever heard, even to this day. It seemed like it would last forever, but I don't think it was even a full 5 seconds before I didn't get out of bed so much as it seemed to instantly vaporize from underneath me. I ran so fast to my parents' room, in the other end of the house, that I don't think they even realized I had come in for a few seconds, and this was in a cheap mobile home, where every step seemed to thunder through every room in the house, no matter how quietly you tried to walk. I don't think that I'd ever moved faster before, or ever even come close since. My dad went to my room to check it out, but said he didn't see or hear anything. I was clinging to my mother and shivering the whole time he was gone, and even afterward it took me a couple hours to stop trembling. I refused to even go into my room without another person for months, and slept. When I did sleep, which wasn't often, on the couch for around a year, with all the light in the living room on.
When we were kids, my cousin came over to spend the holiday. One night, he came over to me with a panicked look on his face.
Are you controlling that toy?
I didn't know what he was talking about. He explained he was playing games in my room when our motorcycle toy moved. It had a man that rode on the back of it and could swerve side to side. Thinking someone was screwing with him, he threw a beanbag chair in front of the bedroom closet. After a while, nothing happened, so he looked inside and found no one there. No one was under the bed either. That's when he came to me. I gave him a look. I suspected he was just trying to scare me. So I said, okay, let's test it. We'll take the toy out on the porch and see if it does it again. I figured if someone was controlling it with a remote, it wouldn't be able to penetrate far enough outside. So we went outside in the dark and held it between us, staring at it. Nothing happened. Just as we were about to leave, the little man swerved side to side.
I remember having a lot of dreams when I was little. There were these dreams that were incredibly random and in some cases downright dumb. There was this one dream that I had for about 3 days straight. I'll never forget it. I'm sitting at the dining room table and my parents are cooking food, and for some reason I'm starving, like I haven't eaten in days. So they bring out plates with everyone's food and they set them all down, lastly mine, which is just a normal paper plate, without a single bit of food on it. Now this is where I normally wake up, shake myself from the weird dream and go get a bowl of cereal, and I did that exact thing about 3 days straight. Then on the last day that I woke up, everyone was already awake, as I'd slept in. Upon walking out to the smell of freshly cooked breakfast, I looked at the table, and everyone had the porcelain plates with their food, and at the last spot at the table, there was an empty paper plate. This might not seem creepy, but my mother is a neat freak and it was as if I was seeing a ghost. Because of my dream, it felt as if I knew that the plate was going to be there, but there was no good explanation as to why it should be. After that, many odd dreams occur, and usually they end up turning out to be mini premonitions of what I might see in the coming weeks, always accompanied with that overwhelming feeling that you get when you're watching a movie where someone is going to die, but you really don't want them to die. Even though no matter how hard you want that person to survive, you can't stop them from dying.
My room is directly above our garage. If I'm wearing socks or I'm barefoot, I can feel the garage door opening or closing. It's also so loud that I can always hear it. This was some months ago. I think it was like 5 or 6 at night. It was pretty dark outside because of some storm on the way or passing through. I was playing something on my bell set some months ago with my music blasting and I felt the garage door open through the carpet. I go peek through the blinds. My window overlooks the driveway, assuming my dad's home from work. My brother always parks in the driveway, and since I didn't see any car, I figured my dad was home and parked in the garage. I yelled something, waiting for a response from him, but I heard nothing. After some minutes of shouting with no answer, I went downstairs. The house was empty. I decided to take a look in the garage to see if my dad had actually gotten home. The garage door was open and there were no cars inside or outside the garage. So I assume my idiot brother had stopped home from work and left it open. I called him. He hadn't been home in hours. I called my dad. He was still at work. My mom wouldn't be home for hours and my other brother was away at college. The only other people who know the garage door code are my brother's friends and they hadn't come by. I grabbed my dog, went into my room, and kept telling myself that I wasn't hearing any knocking on my bedroom door and that no one was waiting for me down the stairs. We still don't know why it opened by itself.
My scariest moment was in the summer before my senior year of college. My friend was subletting from my roommate, and over the summer we became very close, to the point where we could make the other laugh just by a look. My apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up with no AC and exposed brick. And the city we live in gets oppressively hot and humid in July and August, so our place basically became a pizza oven, and impossible to sleep in. We soon made a habit of heading to our local dive bar to soak up the AC, and hope that the drinks we had would make us drowsy enough that we could get some sleep despite the heat. This one night, we left the bar around 1:30 and headed home. As we turned onto a side street, there was a sound like every bird in the city was screaming for its life. And yet there was no movement in the trees around us. All conversation died and we picked up the pace. Our route took us past an old women's hospital that our school was in the process of converting into student housing. We were across the street from the site, but as we got to about the middle of it, I got the overwhelming feeling that I was prey, and whatever it was that was after me was running as fast as it could. I didn't say, see, or hear anything, but my friend must have felt the same way. Because at the same moment, we grabbed each other's hand and ran as fast as we could back to our apartment. Once there, neither of us could talk about what happened, but didn't want to be alone, so we sat in my room chain smoking until dawn. After that night, it was like we lost whatever rhythm we'd gained over the summer. By graduation, we barely acknowledged each other on the street.
This isn't paranormal, but I think it's interesting. I've always been known to talk in my sleep. My mom used to hear me from her bedroom, and so could my brother, who I shared a bedroom with until I went off to college, and they would listen in on my dreamy conversations. Sometimes they would even ask me questions like, "And then what did the turkey do?" Sometimes I would respond and sometimes I didn't. Afterwards, when I was living at school, my roommate and his girlfriend would enjoy listening to my mumbles. Anyway, what I have also been known to do, though less frequently, is sleepwalk. When I was young, I used to wake up in the middle of the night because I had either fallen out of bed or smacked my head against the wall, but I never got very far. My family has verified that I move around a lot when I sleep, though I don't believe any of them have actually witnessed me getting out of bed and traveling any great distance. The first incident that I have heard of where I caused massive brick shitting in others was in middle school when my class went on a trip to Washington, D.C. My friends Dave and Nick were my roommates in the hotel we stayed in. There was one large bed and a little dinky extra bed. We decided that Nick and Dave would share the big bed, and I would sleep on the little bed. So we stayed up watching TV for a while, but I ended up falling asleep first. Nick and Dave continued watching TV for a long time, and claimed that sometime in the middle of the night I began talking. They didn't know what I was saying, but they decided to have some fun. They said silly things to me, like singing lines from Madonna's Papa Don't Preach, stupid shit. They said I didn't really respond, and of course they got bored. They turned off the TV and shut off the lights. Before they could doze off, they claimed that I actually rose up off the bed and sat up straight. Then I supposedly turned towards them with my eyes wide open and stared through them. They thus began shitting bricks. Nick reached towards the nightstand between the two beds and grabbed a hotel brand pen off the desk, thinking I was gonna freak and attack them. They huddled there for a few moments, and I just fell back to sleep. Having finished shitting bricks, they decided to use the straps located on the side of the little bed. I guess they are used to keep the mattress in place for storage to tie me down. Apparently they hooked me up tight, and I started struggling. I woke up the next morning with my legs strapped down, and of course pretty confused. The second incident, and the only event I am aware of in which I actually got up and walked a great distance, was while I was living at school. I think it was probably late November, so it was rather cold outside. This is important in a moment. My roommate and I had just gone to bed, and again I had been the one to fall asleep first. My roommate stayed awake listening to music, which is something he did a lot, and he says that I just shot right up out of bed and went to my closet. He asked me what's going on. Apparently I replied with, "I just have to get out of here. I just need to get out." He was probably shitting bricks as he watched me put on my winter coat and the flip-flops I used in the shower. I apparently also grabbed my student ID and left the room. I don't know how long I was gone for, but I actually woke up outside, in the cold, standing at the edge of a cement wall looking over the quad parking lot. I was wearing nothing under my unzippered coat but a t-shirt and underwear. I took a moment to realize where I actually was, and I went back inside. My roommate was obviously still awake and asked, "Where did you go?" I said that I had just been outside, but I don't remember leaving. After a few minutes we went back to sleep, and that was that.
Okay, well, when I was about 8 or 9, I would say, I had something really freaky happen. Not the first of these incidents, but this one was more telling than previous experiences. I was sitting on the floor watching TV, and I started to zone out like I do at times. I had this very vivid vision of my mother and grandfather getting in a car accident. After I snapped out of it, I ran into my dad's room and started freaking out, telling him Mom and Peppa had gotten into a car accident. This was about 8 at night. My mother worked at the same place as my grandfather, and they worked swings, so they did not leave work till 11 at night. My dad tried to explain they were still at work, but I was freaking out so bad he called my mom at work and had me talk to her. I told her that I saw them get into a car accident. Naturally, my mom tried her best to calm me down by explaining she hadn't left work yet. After I got off the phone with my mom, I insisted with my dad they were going to get into a car accident on the way home and told him exactly what I saw. I fell asleep on the couch that night and ended up waking up to my dad talking on the phone frantically. On the way home, my mom and grandfather had gotten into a car accident. When my mom came home from the hospital, my dad relayed everything I had told him, and my mom was a little shocked, to say the least, because the details were correct. My dad later asked me how I knew, and I did my best to explain it was like a dream, but I was awake, and that really freaked him out. From then on, I had a few flashes of things here and there, but only a few major incidents of this sort.
My little cousin is very autistic. He is usually in his own little world, not caring about anything. I've never seen him scared. Even things like heights or huge insects that terrify me seem to just amuse him. So I was staying with him and my aunt who had just recently moved across the county. Her house didn't have room for me to sleep, so instead we were staying at a castle-like place that her friend inherited and was letting us use. The first day we were there, my cousin was very excited, exploring the whole place. Something about the change in setting really seemed to make him happy. That night my cousin came out of the room he was sleeping in, terrified. We simply can't calm him down. We try to take him back to his bed, but he refuses to go back in the room. We take a look and see that nothing is out of the ordinary, but he seems to get scared just seeing us go in without him. I later learned that the castle is supposed to be haunted, and my aunt's friend sometimes lets people tour it. Now, if it were anyone else, I would say they were trying to prank me, but because it was my autistic cousin, I think he encountered some kind of ghost. He refused to go back in the room the entire week we were there.
I had a very weird childhood. I grew up in a town in the backwoods and my house was near a cemetery. I'd always go there with my dad to catch turtles. There were several ponds in it, and as I got older I'd play there every day. I'd run around and use it as a park. I also used to water the flowers on the graves and similar things. I always felt very comfortable there, and as a teenager I'd go for walks in it at 2 or 3 a.m. and never felt threatened at all. On a couple occasions I had a friend join me, and on both occasions I felt threatened, like perhaps the residents were unhappy I'd brought anyone else in with me. The first time I brought him in we both saw a fuzzy indistinct shape that looked like a large dog farther down one of the main paths, and it started coming toward us. Needless to say we flipped the shit and ran out as fast as we could. The second time on the same path there were 2 blurry points of light in the middle of the path, like the glowing eyes of certain animals but higher up. They were bobbing up and down in a manner that reminded me of people walking toward us. I still wish I'd stayed to see exactly what they were.
Out in northeastern California, around Chico, me and my friend would wander around the backwoods of this backwards town. There were a lot of people with creepy, indistinguishable faces who would sit in their underwear whittling all day long. I only saw 2 girls the entire 3 weeks I stayed there. Well, anyways, we wandered out in the backwoods near his parents' housing development. We usually took dogs with us. My friend once explained that there had been missile silos up in the hills and that we might be able to get near them. So we wander out along the river, leading up the dam nearby. We came out to this thickly wooded area, where there was a broken perimeter fence. The dogs kept dragging us past weird stuff, like an open area where there was one tree with gravel in a circle but no roads or anything away from the tree. It had some of the nicest looking apples I've ever seen. We kept heading through these woods and found a neat little hobo fort. We found another stream and an old refrigerator with some of what I assumed was blood in it. The dogs led us on until we got to the edge of this fence, and there was no way to go but back around to the river. Well, the dogs finally stopped. It had been raining for a while. Then the dogs went crazy, started barking at a section of the fence that was ripped up, so we leaned down and looked at it. There were strips of bloody cloth all around the base of the fence. We looked off into the continuing woods. My friend said right then that he was going back. We had seen 2 red eyes in the bushes, running off, rustling the bushes. It was much bigger than the rabbits the dogs usually chased. Other times, we had found that much of the town was filled with very bizarre and strange people. Many places we went were old and mostly antiques dealers who would stare out at anyone normal walking by. They were creepy old people mostly. We were accosted by skater punks that had nothing to say other than get out of our town, and any other such weird shit to say. They all had very deep set eyes.
I was alone in my room one night. The whole place was empty. I had just moved in the week before and all kinds of bad shit kept happening to the house. We were delayed a month before we were finally able to move in, so much was going wrong, probably construction, whatever. Missing tools, leaking pipes, and strangest of all, dust would collect everywhere in the house except one corner of my room, this vague oval that never collected dust. I had declined a party invitation as I had a lot of work to do, so I had a rare moment alone in this house. I heard a faint moaning sound just as I was taking off my glasses. I didn't even wait to clean them, they went right back on. I've always been jumpy when I'm alone. I looked to every corner of the ceiling and then the floor, my eyes settling on the corner with no dust in it. As soon as I focus on it I feel a chill, then a dull feeling on my chest as if someone had pushed me. It's hard to explain. I rush to turn on the light. I'm breathing hard now. The moaning stops. I look down and notice a spot of red on my sock. I look under my desk, all over my room, and I have no idea what could have given me that spot. I knew there wasn't a spot that morning. I took off my sock and there's no wound to explain it either. I hear a whimper upstairs and proceed to play loud music for the rest of the night, folding my feet up from the floor as I sit back into my chair. That's all that came of it that night. I threw the sock away the next morning. How was I supposed to explain that to anyone?
One night when I was 8 or 9 years old, I had this extremely vivid dream about this short. It was shoulder high to the window sill. The shadow creature that walked on its knuckles like a gorilla came through my window, pinning me down and rolling me up in my blankets so I couldn't struggle free. Then it started dragging me back out of my window and into the fields behind my house. It was moving pretty fast, and as I dreamt, I could feel rocks and gravel tearing through the blanket and digging into my back as it ran me across the ground. It dragged me up the side of the levee when a barking dog in the yard of one of the houses down below scared it off. The kicker: I woke up wrapped up in my shredded blanket on top of the levee behind my house. I occasionally sleepwalked as a child, not very often, but it really freaked me out when I had that dream that coincided with it.
When I was fairly young, probably 6 or 7 years old, I used to have recurring dreams about these monsters. They were really vivid, and always had the same creatures. The one monster that always scared me the most was this gigantic skeleton-like thing. It had an elongated head, almost like a pterodactyl head, and all sorts of spikes and protrusions coming out from its bones. It almost seemed like the leader of my dream ghouls, and was always the center of attention. So one night, I'm asleep, and I have a particularly bad nightmare with the monsters, with the skeleton thing being the focus as usual. Then I wake up, and it's the middle of the night. I hear a tapping on the other side of my bed's headboard. Now, this is odd because the headboard is right up against the wall, and there really isn't any way for anything to be tapping against. Scared out of my wits, I cautiously sit up in my bed, turn around and peek over the top of the headboard. The skeleton thing is staring right at me. I scream for my mother at the top of my lungs and duck back down to my bed. My father comes running in to see me hiding under the blanket weeping. He consoles me for a long time, trying to convince me the skeleton thing isn't there. However, by this time I'm so terrified nothing makes sense. Eventually he is able to calm me down and leaves me alone in bed once again. I've never seen the skeleton thing since, but I'll highly doubt I'll ever forget him. There could be a chance it was all a dream, as I do talk in my sleep and my father could have heard me that way, but I had never until that point seen the skeleton thing so fleshed out, so real.
I've had multiple experiences with the paranormal. Probably because I live out in the creepy wooded areas of New England. Either way, one of my friends and I decided it would be a good idea to go for a walk since we were both pretty awake and there was a full moon out and it was pretty bright. We went for a walk down the road to a local pond just for fun and took some pictures of us on our mini adventure. However, on the way back we kept hearing the rustling of leaves behind us. It was fall, as if something was walking there. I kept pawning it off on the wind or a chipmunk or some small animal rustling on the side of the road. However, when we got pretty close to my driveway there was a distinct sound of a person running up behind us at full speed. No leaves, just pounding of feet on pavement. After glancing back to see nothing there. That sent us both bolting down my driveway to the house. We reached inside and slammed the door. We heard it run all the way up to the steps of my porch and stop. We looked at each other and didn't say anything. We caught our breath and thought it was over. We'd never go walking out at night like that again. Well, needless to say that night I had some pretty hefty nightmares. I figure they were induced by me being scared shitless from whatever it was running at us. Well, I had a nightmare of this really emaciated woman grabbing my ankles and pulling herself up onto my bed. When I woke up and looked down she remained there for about 3 seconds and stared right at me and disappeared. I haven't had an issue with the pounding feet or nightmares since. Either way, both of those experiences made me shit an entire mason yard.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.